So, thanks for joining me this morning, Aaron.
Hello, all right.
Lovely to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too, from on screen rather than in person, but still nice.
Yes, such are these times. So, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your involvement in the creative arts?
Yeah, so I'm Aaron Live. It feels weird to say this because I haven't done much this year, but I would run Sad for Life Records, responsible for putting together Healapalooza Festival, worked with a bunch of local artists on different shows in auxiliary warehouse parties and everything else. And I now work at Basecamp, putting on shows regularly there, from art to music and film and wrestling and sort of anything I can get my hands on, really, anything to keep me sane and entertained.
Brilliant. I think my first introduction to you was it was when I was first starting off on this kind of mission of being utterly dedicated to the creative arts in Teesside, and I found out about the auxiliary and I was like, wow. And I was like thinking about, Anthony Wilson and Factory and thinking, oh, well, we can have warehouse. And what we should do is put on parties there and call them warehouse parties. And as so often in all these brilliant ideas I thought I was having about what Teesside should do, it was already doing that. And so it's fantastic to find out that somebody was already on the case for that. So that was kind of something.
Yeah, it was good. And obviously, every time we talk, you give me that comparison to Tony Wilson, and I cringe only for myself, not because you're safe, but because I hate, like, I don't know, I hate bigging myself up, but it is probably the nicest compliment anyone's ever given me. So I appreciate it.
Oh, well, other people have tried to say that about me. So it was really, like, once again, it was brilliant.
You just want to pass it on.
Yeah, it's like, no, that's another thing Aaron's up to. So tell us a little bit about Sad for Life, how that came about and what you do.
The story of how it came about is very boring in terms of how it developed. So, like, when we started, it was me and my friend were working at a bar in Norton. I've been promoting now for about 11 years as of this year, since I was like 16 years old. So it's all
I was going to say since you're about 5.
Yeah. So I was 16, I was putting gigs on illegally in a pub down there when I was 18. And it's all I'd ever really wanted to do. And I fell out of it for so long, purely because I was in a band that, we did all right. We didn't do amazing, but we did all right. And it felt like we were on our way. And then that was put to an end just as, promoting it a couple of years before it was. So I was eager just to be creative again. And then I ended up working with this guy, Sam, Head of Steam in Norton, and a friend, Callum. And me and Sam and Callum, all we would talk about was music. Me and Sam started a band, Heel Turn. And we were like, right, we're going to put our own music out. We might as well start a label. And we literally decided this while on shift together and no one was in the pub. We picked a name there on the spot because we found a German Simpsons t-shirt that said something on it. And when we translated it, it was Sad for Life. And we thought that was just really cool. And then, we did like a launch party and we released some t-shirts, and we didn't really know if we were going to have other bands on the label and whatever else. And then, the amount of interest we had, we just explored every avenue. If a venue said, well, that's interesting, we sort of took our chances with it. I ended up working at Sticky Fingers where we did our launch, and I ended up moving to Skins and Needles and putting gigs on for them because they realised who we were. And then from Skins and Needles, after 11 years of trying to get Graham Ramsey from 10 Feet Tall to hear my name, he finally heard my name through putting gigs in our tattoo studio. And here we are. It just developed one thing after another, really. But we tried to use it as a platform, Sad for Life. We didn't want it to be strictly a record label. We were trying to notice things that were missing in Teesside that we loved about cities and other bands and other sort of record labels that weren't just going, oh, well, because anyone can release music now. So we were like, well, we can release music anywhere, but what else can we do? So, we're releasing t-shirts, we were putting on parties and festivals, and, so we were just recognizing all these missing bits and going, well, if we do that, people will like it because no one else is doing it or doing it well. No offense to anyone that try to do certain things, but we sort of felt like, we might be wrong, but we were confident guys, and I think we still are. But at the time when we started off, we were just, every day we were getting Narc magazine, any volume, and then it was becoming, every time we did anything, our eyes are on us. So we were just like, right, we can do a festival, we can sign a band, we can release t-shirts, and we can do it better than anyone. And we did for probably about a year. And then other things came about. So we ended up tied in, 3 or 4 different aspects of it. So I don't really know what Sad for Life is at the minute, but I'm hoping to sort of reinvent it in the new year?
So earlier this year, you were going to be putting on Healapalooza. So as I understand it, that was the first time that BBC introducing we're going to have a stage at a local festival. So tell us all the good stuff. I know it's didn't happen as it should, but tell us about its origins and what all that's about.
I'll just be very honest with you, and this was me 2 years ago, not me now. I think I've changed and grew up a little bit, speaking as a 28-year-old man. But when me and Sam were in Heeltown, we were quite mischievous when we were together, and we booked a gig at Empire a week before we were supposed to be playing in Stockton for a festival for the Georgian Theatre, Tees Music Lions, and Kids of Solid Gold. And this, again, put my hands up. I've apologised to them, and I will apologise to them again and again, purely because everything we did was purely for our own purpose, and we didn't really think about upsetting them. We were just like, well, we can use this, basically. And basically what had happened is booked a gig the week before, and that's sort of like a big no-no, but we didn't get told that we shouldn't have booked a gig before. And in our eyes, playing at 1 a.m. in a tiny room in Empire was an opportunity to promote our slot a week later at 1 p.m. in Stockton at this festival that probably nobody, we were probably the least known band on the bill. So we've seen it as an opportunity to get our name out there a little bit with a week's notice, and we just had an EP come out, so it was quite exciting. We were just accepting everything at the time. But obviously they took offence to that and said, you should know as a promoter not to do that, book a gig a week in advance. And then I got upset by that because I was like, well, why are they judging my skills as a promoter when they haven't put in the small print that we shouldn't have booked a gig and blah, blah, blah. Ended up getting a bit ugly anyway. We ended up going to see one of our favourite bands the day we were supposed to be playing the festival. And we were tweeting about them all day and posting on our Instagram story saying, we posted a picture of a sold out crowd saying this could be us, but you playing, and just stupid childish stuff really. But we were doing it purely to get a laugh and get a rise out of people. But then on the way home, we were still pretty drunk, and we said, you know what, we'll put a festival on and we'll sell it out and we'll base it around Heeltown. And that's why it's called Healapalooza. We originally said we'll headline and we'll book bands better than us to support us, just to sort of be those guys. But then we ended up, it went from 10 bands to, we got a bit of funding from Gordon, why can I not remember the name, Creative Factory, give us a little bit of funding, which honestly means the world, and meant the world to us at the time, which took it from being 10 bands in Heeltown headlining this daft festival and one venue to, well, let's get 3 venues involved and let's use the side of town nobody else is using, and let's spend too much money, let's pull out of our own pocket a little bit, and let's print t-shirts, and let's go to Orange Pit Market and see what we can do with them. And it just grew at this unbelievable level, and we ended up selling 300 tickets as opposed to the 100 we aimed for. So we tested ourselves a little bit, and I think we learned a lot from it, and I'm quite grateful for the little mishap we had with Tees Music Lions. And again, I respect those guys, and I'm not just saying it because I'm on camera, but they are genuinely good at what they do, and we just saw an opportunity. And we were inspired by the Beastie Boys and wrestlers, and people who were naturally mischief causes. So we took a bit of that and turned it into Healapalooza and booked bands that were beyond what we ever thought we'd be booking at that point. And then obviously going into this year, you mentioned there that BBC were involved the first time. They were going to be involved in a festival in Middlesbrough that wasn't specifically their own, or wasn't specific, that was done by 2 guys who were booking bands from this room, this tiny little room in Acklam. We were booking, 30 odd bands ourselves, and BBC and Rianne offered their support, which was just unbelievable. And it was just this massive opportunity. We even did, obviously there's a big thing at the minute about gender splits and stuff, and we knew we were never going to get 50-50, but I think with one band having a girl in before she left the band, we were at like 51-49, I think, and then I think we went down to like 53 for, it was almost spot on for members of bands being 50-50. And it would have just been, whether we sold out again or whether we sold 100 tickets and lost loads of money on it, it would have meant a lot to us to just sort of be able to go, well, we did that. We set a bit of a standard there, a standard that a lot of people are living up to, but in terms of 30 bands and in terms of that side of town, that gets spat on quite a bit, literally and figuratively. It just would have been a really good, cool thing to do. But we lost that, unfortunately. But if I can't, I'm not going to sit here and say I feel sorry for myself because everyone lost a lot this year. So it's, it's just part of it.
Yeah, well, let's hope you get all that back next year.
We will.
Bigger and better, absolutely. And yeah, respect for you for being conscious of that, because I know, particularly in the music industry, that it is something that needs addressing. I mean, it's been really interesting for me doing all these interviews. Now we're sort of, starting to get nearly 200 now.
Yeah.
That there's been a really, really good demographic that I'm really pleased about, without actually having to make too much conscious effort about it.
That was one of our things, is we didn't want to go, well, let's make it 50-50 because we want it to be 50-50 and everyone will love us. It was purely because it should be, and we wanted to show, I hate sitting there going, we tried to make it 50-50, because if it was 60-40, but we represented females well, and you could go into it all day long, couldn't you? It could be like what sexuality people are, what religion people believe in. Obviously we didn't look into every single angle, but for us it was a start, and it was like, if we can make a conscious effort to just try now, then as we get better understanding things, hopefully people spot what we're doing, and try a little harder and realize it can actually be done.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the message. It's actually not that tough. Just just all the lads in the corner shouting, like, you can look past them and see who might be not so shouty in the background, or actually twice as shouty. But
the headline band was meant to be All Is in Love, who I've known for quite some time. But the message it's 4 guys on stage, 4 white guys on stage, but the message they send is love each other, and everyone deserves better, pretty much. So it felt fitting. As much as looking at it would have been 4 white guys on stage jumping around and causing a mess, the message they're actually singing about, and their album is called It's Okay to Talk. The mental health advocates. It would have meant it wasn't just about 50-50 gender split. It was purely like, listen to what people are singing about at this festival as well. Well, hopefully, like you say, we can just bring it back and do it some justice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we hope. Have you always been interested in music? Is that something you grew up with?
Yeah, short answer. My parents were massively into things that other parents weren't, in terms of probably were, but they were more vocal about it. You know what I mean? Like, if we were in a car and they were listening to music, it'd be on full volume. My dad would have the windows down, singing every word. My mum, it's not unusual. She loved vampires and stuff, and she was just very vocal about it. And and the music she loved, she wouldn't shut up about. She'd be like, you need to listen to this song because of this reason. And then, I had cousins. One of my cousins, David, the first album I actually got before I spent money on an album was the Tony Hawk soundtrack on a disc that he burned for me. He's just like, listen to this, and it opened my eyes to a lot of music. And then he showed me Beastie Boys, and I've loved them ever since. He showed me Blink-182, as well as having 2 older brothers that loved Blink-182, Limp Bizkit at the time. And it's cool cousin David that was showing me all this great music, and really passionate about it as well. Not just like, listen to this, it's good. He was like, listen to this because, and give you a whole speech. And then my cousin Peter was in a band called Justin's Bar Mitzvah, and they were touring. They were quite a big deal in London at one point. They were actually on NME's, like, Whatever Happened to These Bands from the 2000s list a couple of years ago. They toured Japan and made the charts in Japan and sold out tours in Japan. And being little 11-year-old Aaron, seeing that, and when they come to your house, sort of being like, all right, okay, these are real people, and drunk in my house, and they're causing a bit of chaos in my house. This is sort of what I want. So yeah, it's through family and through just genuinely being surrounded by people that won't just like something, will like something and tell you every little detail about it. I think I'm being the youngest one in that family as well. I think it was inevitable, really, that would just become me.
Brilliant. Inevitable. I like that. Terrific. So I know that over lockdown you've created some brilliant rehearsal space down at Basecamp, Sidecar Studios.
Yeah.
And you've kept yourself busy, but I know you've been a bit concerned that everything's been a bit on hold. But I think you've started making some future plans now.
Yeah, so I was beating myself up a lot. You know, we've been meaning to have this chat here for what, maybe like 3 or 4 months now, probably, if not longer. And more than anything, it was probably me putting it off because I've been all year long. I felt like I haven't done anything. And the other day, I actually wrote a note on my phone just of all the stuff I've done. And you know, I looked at it and went, "That's actually not that bad." Obviously, in my head, I was comparing it to all the stuff I should have done. You know, like Healapalooza and all the bands I had booked in that I haven't even announced yet. You know, I was bringing my hero, my idol, was coming from America in November. That wasn't announced or anything, but you know, whether it was coming out of my own pocket and I bought tickets, it was something, you know, it was something that meant a lot to me. But you know, that never happened, and really in a little pit of misery about, you know, all this stuff that should have happened. But actually, no, like you say, I was a big part of, you know, when Graham asked me what we should do with this practice space we had, or what we should do with this room we had that was being used by Cape Cup to practice in. I said, well, why not brand it and use it as our own practice space? Let's give it its own name. Let's give it individual to base camp. And, you know, I was in there painting it. It took me a little bit longer than it should have, as he'll forever let me know. You know, I pasted loads of posters on the wall from, you know, from some of them are from the 50s, all in Teesside, and bands that have been to Teesside. And you know, sort of made it a little bit sentimental. And then, you know, that's been passed on now to Kev McManus of Dead Moon Lizard Kings fame. He is absolutely smashing it. You know, I can't take any credit for what it is now, but from where it started, I'd like to say that, you know, I was a little bit of a part of that. And, you know, I can be proud of that. I can go in there knowing that bands are in there practicing now while we're downstairs organising gigs or whatever, which is really, really exciting and cool to say. You know, I did local music t-shirt earlier in the year, and I'm hoping to make that a yearly thing. We did Healapalooza House Party. It was just a digital version, which hopefully we won't have to do next year, but you know, it's a platform at least to grow. But now, you know, I did a festival last year in Newcastle called Celebrate Everything, and my original plan for that was to book 10 bands, none of them from the same town or city, and put them in a different town or city than they're all from. So there was only one band from Newcastle, and try and sell as many tickets as I can. It was pretty much what Healapalooza was supposed to be. But we were going to take it on tour. So, you know, we booked 10 bands, and in the long term, hopefully do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night in different cities. But obviously this year sort of put a stop to even having that conversation. So through speaking with Graham and for all of our crazy ideas, we ended up pitching it to a few people and got a bit of funding for it as what it's going to be known as now, which is Celebrate Everything, which is going to be in Basecamp. Maybe we'll send it somewhere else, I don't know, but you know, for now it's going to be in Basecamp for the next year at least, and probably beyond. And it's going to be a bit of a showcase of, you know, all of the art that we've come to like and come to love, and the art that we don't know exists yet. I guess it's going to be music based primarily, obviously, because that's what we know and that's the best way for us to communicate with an audience. But you know, we're going to put bands on, and we're not going to, you know, it's not going to be all indie, it's not going to be all rock, it's not going to be all rap. It's going to be a bit of everything. It's going to be well represented, and with that, I won't go too much into detail because nothing's announced yet other than the name and the concept. But we're going to, you know, we're going to create collaborations through the brand. You know, that you might see a rapper paired with a ballerina. You might see, I don't know, a mime paired with a metal band. You know, and for me, we're going to make it visually pleasing, which is the main thing, especially the digital version. We're going to give people, as much as it's going to be good to listen to, and you're going to be like, oh, this is my new favorite song. It's going to be a platform for people to really enjoy watching something new and exciting that they might not have seen before or ever again. So yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really, really into this idea of combining the arts. I mean, I guess this is something that I hope is going to come out of this listening and storytelling project that I'm doing here.
Yeah.
And if you need any dancers, I've had some absolutely fantastic dancers and choreographers and people that do stuff in the theatre that I didn't even know existed. Well,
I always feel like if I ever need sort of like to look down a different direction, I could just go on your timeline and scroll down and go, all right, okay. There's a nice collection of different art.
Absolutely. It's, you know, although I only realised it recently, it has been really the focus of my life for the past 30 years or more. Been knocking around quite a while. So why this is the why question. I mean, you say, yeah, you grew up, you've been around it, but a lot of people grew up around music and with parents that are well into music, and but they haven't gone on to carve their lives around it. Why do you do it? What does it give you? What's so important about it? What's so important about the arts? And what do they give to you personally and to society in general?
Uh, why, first of all, I'm not good at much else. I can't be bothered being good at anything else, pretty much. So I'd rather put a little bit more effort into this. And, I didn't want to work. I worked in bars and I hated it. I've worked in Hollywood Bowl, I hated it. Um, I've had different jobs everywhere. I was an apprentice at one time, working in HMV and retail, and I hated it. And when I realized I could do it, I was just like, all right, this is fun. I can work, get drunk at work, get drunk after work. Uh, you're not to say that all I want to do is get drunk, but I can have fun basically at work is what I'm saying. And I was like, okay, if I can do that, then why wouldn't I pursue this? And, like I said, seeing my cousin sort of break tables in my house when he should have been, they cancelled a gig in Darlington because they wanted to play FIFA with me. And when I was like 11 and seeing that and being like, okay, this is now a bit of me. I can be the chaotic idiot a little bit without hurting anyone or breaking tables. I can sort of do that. And tasting it at the age of 16, I wasn't sure if it was what I wanted to do when I was 16, but before I even had a job, I put a gig on. And I was like, why would I ever want to work 9 to 5 when I could put a gig on and leave with a little bit less money, but a better time. I've enjoyed myself here. I can do that. So that's why basically I enjoyed doing it, and I've always done what I want, I guess, which sounds really selfish and white trashy, but I have.
I don't think that's selfish. I mean, like Buckminster Fuller said, like decades ago, actually, in terms of real wealth, is like planetary resources combined with human intellect, it would actually be cheaper to pay people $40,000 a year to stay at home.
Yeah.
And while they're at home, they can sit and think about it, what it is that they actually want to do and get out and do that. And I don't think there's anything selfish about that. I mean, what you do, you bring a lot of joy and pleasure and excitement to into everything that you do. And so I just think, sorry, just a bit of a soapbox rant about that.
Sorry. No, it's good to hear. You always have self-doubt, and that's one of my biggest self-doubts is am I selfish? And just a little joke about that is I do what I want to do on every level, and that, like, again, like Kelly and Gemma will laugh at this, who work at Base Camp. They try to get me to mop the floor all the time, and every time they walk back in the room, I've got someone else doing it for me. So I think I've just got a knack for being like, I can't be bothered doing that, but I really want to do this. So if someone else can do that, I'll go and do something that's valuable to me. So there's a little bit of, and it's a natural thing. I don't even mean to do it until people point it out to me.
Yeah, get away with stuff like that with a cheeky smile, basically.
But yeah, why I do it now is, I want to see people get better, and I want to, I've seen both sides of it. I've seen gigs with nobody, and I've seen gigs with people, and I've seen gigs that people have gone away from and gone, God, we can really do that. And when I was in Bilingual a few years ago, the band I was in, Dylan Cartledge, George Luca and Stephanos from Swears, our attitude was just, we're completely different, but let's embrace that. We were a rock band with a rapper, and it's not completely different, but in Teesside there was nothing else. Everyone else was indie and singer-songwriter-ish, and at the time no one else was on stage shouting about whatever the hell we were shouting about that day. And sort of going away and hearing people say that we were the favourite band, and we sometimes say, you'd see people, I guess. I'm quite observant. You'd see people sort of get a little bit of confidence at the fact that something different was happening and whatever else. And I'm not saying we were responsible for every new band that's happened, but you could just see a little bit that we brought something out of other bands. I think I might be wrong. I might be being a bit big-headed, but I think we did, and I think that sort of inspired me. And going back to when I was 11 and 13, getting stuck into gigs with my dad, like under his shirt and stuff. I kind of like being the guy that now can put the gigs on where 11 or 13-year-olds are getting stuck under the dad's shirt into a gig, and causing a little bit of mayhem that way, or doing 14 plus gigs and seeing that 15-year-old kid in the crowd think, I can do this, I can start a band, I can jump on stage, and purely from being in the atmosphere, in the environment, and seeing the atmosphere, as opposed to sort of being at home and being told you can, but not really being shown that you can. I guess I like the idea that one of my gigs might just mean something to one person that goes on to do something really cool and exciting. And that's not just if they're 15, you could be like a 50-year-old that's never put a gig on. And I've spoken to David Aho, who goes to a lot of gigs. We had a drink together last year, and he was you know, he sort of said to me, I've always wanted to put a gig on. I just, you know, no one's going to be bothered. I'm, you know, 50 or however old he is. Sorry if you're not 50, David. You know, he sort of said, I've always wanted to do it, but I'm getting a bit old and no one's going to care about the gig that I'm putting on. And I was like, well, why not? Like, you really love music. You clearly care about it enough to hold your camera up and crowd surf at every gig. Just give it a go and see what happens. You know, you might lead someone else on to think, God, I can do that, gets a career out of it. Or, do you know what I mean? I like the idea that what I'm doing isn't just an opportunity for the band on stage and an opportunity for people to see music that they love and find their new favorite band, but it might be an opportunity for someone to walk away and go, God, I can really do that. You know, this is possible. So yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, opening up the possibilities. That's I think that's an absolutely brilliant thing to do. And you know, and there's nothing wrong sticking on stuff when you're 50, you know, love.
Well, maybe not. Maybe I'll never inspire anybody. Maybe people will only ever hate me. But we'll find out. I'll keep cracking on, and hopefully one day someone will like me enough to follow in my footsteps.
There'll always be
Probably
haters
don't follow
when you're putting yourself out there, but you know, people will hate you, whatever you are and whatever you pretend to be. So you may as well just be yourself and be the best you there is. And I have to say, seems a pretty good Aaron J live to me.